Honourable. Questions? Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, Statistics Canada reported that New Brunswick lost another 3,000 jobs in January. Statistics Canada also reported that our labour force shrank by 5,000 people. If we look back to October of 2014, the month that the Gallant government insists upon using as the benchmark of their performance, here's what the Gallant government has accomplished. A net loss of 1,400 people from the labour force and a net gain of 100 jobs. Would the Premier classify this as an economy that is soaring, and an economy that is growing, or an economy that has been held back by poorly considered and politically driven policies? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, despite the fact today's Valentine's Day, certainly going to get no love from the opposition, but that's fine. Mr. Speaker, look, we're very happy to get up at any point to compare the economic record that our province has seen under our progressive policies, Mr. Speaker, our policies that are focused on growth, compared to when the Leader of the Opposition was the Minister of Finance, slashing into health care, education, and frankly, Mr. Speaker, getting very dismal results with regards to economic growth. We grew the economy by working with New Brunswickers in 2015 by 2.3%, the best economic growth rate since 2004 in New Brunswick, and it was the third best in the country. The economy is estimated to have grown in 2016 again, and is estimated to keep growing in 2017. Mr. Speaker, during the 4 years of the Leader of the Opposition's finance term, the economy retracted in the province. So we'll compare that at any moment, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, once again, ignoring this past government's record, I can understand why they would ignore this government, would ignore their record, because it is dismal. 10,000 jobs, whatever happened to that, Mr. Speaker? Statistics Canada reports that in September of 2014, the last month of the previous government, the labour force in New Brunswick stood at 391,700. The jobs number stood at 354,100. When we compare these figures with the January 2017 Gallant government numbers, as reported by StatsCan, we find the labour force has shrunk by 5,100 people, and we observe that there are 2,200 fewer people working. Would the Premier care to admit that the economy is neither soaring nor growing when we express it in terms of people, the only expression that really counts? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the economy of our province grew in 2015, estimated to grow in 16 and 17, for an impact of 3.3% growth over those 3 years, Mr. Speaker. Under the former Leader of the Opposition's term as Finance Minister, the economy in the province grew by 0.2% in 2011, retracted by 1% in 2012, retracted by 0.3% in 2013, and retracted by 0.1% in 2014, Mr. Speaker. So I'm very proud of what New Brunswickers have done over the last 3 years, working very hard, Mr. Speaker, to create jobs and opportunities, and we're going to continue to do what we can as a government to support them in a positive way. Now, if the Leader of the Opposition wants to talk about the records of our respective governments, Mr. Speaker, I ask him to answer this. What does he think of the GDP growth that he was able to not create when he was the Minister of Finance, and how many jobs did his government increase into the economy? A net gain, Mr. Speaker. Would be great to hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, the Premier will not answer a question. He will not deal with the issues of his government and the performance of his government. And I can understand why. I guess I wouldn't talk about it either. The budget speech delivered Tuesday spoke of a growing population in New Brunswick. The census results released on Wednesday proved that New Brunswick is the only province with a shrinking population, and the first province since 2006 to see a population decline. The budget speech was prepared by Gallant's government spin doctors. The census of population was prepared by StatsCan Canada. In light of the facts, would the Premier care to make a statement revising the impression given in the budget speech? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition doesn't recognize that people listening see that he doesn't want to talk about his record. Mr. Speaker, from 2006 to 2010, we actually saw some pretty good growth when it came to the population, Mr. Speaker. From 2010 to 2014, it was abysmal, Mr. Speaker. And unfortunately, it's because the Leader of the Opposition still doesn't recognize that his approach as the Minister of Finance was to cut into education, to cut into health care, which in turn hurt our economy, Mr. Speaker. While luckily we're focused on investing in growth, we're focused in making record investments in education and health care and making investments that will stimulate the economy, Mr. Speaker. So although it's been a rough ride over the last decade in the province because we've had to go through 4 years of the Leader of the Opposition's cuts to education and health care, we are gaining momentum as an economy, we are gaining momentum as a province, and New Brunswickers should be proud of what they've accomplished up to now, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that the only one that believes the province is gaining momentum, gaining and soaring, is the Premier. When he looks in the mirror, he keeps telling himself that every morning. In a published commentary, Fredericton Chamber of Commerce CEO Krista Ross wrote, and I quote, "Our members are experiencing tax fatigue, and the costs of increases in the recent budgets continue to accumulate and act as a drag on our economy." In another commentary, Carol Riley of the Moncton Chamber writes, "Business has been hit hard by a raft of taxes. The HST, gas and diesel taxes, property tax increases, the minimum wage, workmen's compensation rates, and soon a carbon tax, and higher CPP premiums." Mr. Speaker, this is not me talking. This is people in trade and commerce. This is people that know business. Does the Premier feel that the Chamber has raised legitimate issues? And if he does, why doesn't he listen to them, Mr. Speaker? How can he continue to ignore them?
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, nous sommes concentrés comme gouvernement sur la croissance économique. Nous faisons des investissements stratégiques en éducation et en santé aussi, Monsieur le Président, non seulement pour aider la qualité de vie, améliorer la qualité de vie des gens de la province, mais aussi parce que c'est important pour l'économie. Monsieur le Président, en effet, nous sommes en train d'attirer des investissements et des entreprises qui démarrent ici dans la province parce qu'ils savent que nous sommes en train d'investir en éducation. Ils savent que leurs enfants vont avoir des opportunités ici. Ils savent aussi qu'on va avoir une main-d'œuvre qui est qualifiée dans la province, une main-d'œuvre qui est forte dans la province, qui vont leur aider à faire croître leurs entreprises et faire compétition au niveau international. De plus, ils savent qu'on est en train d'investir en santé, qui va aider à d'assurer que leurs employés soient en santé, qui va aider leurs entreprises à faire compétition au niveau international. Alors, Monsieur le Président, qu'est-ce qui est évident, c'est que le chef de l'opposition ne comprend pas l'importance d'investir dans l'éducation et la santé pour faire croître notre économie, Monsieur le Président.
Leader of the Official Opposition. Member for Fredericton Grand Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On September 30th, 2016, the Premier announced the reinstatement of Grade 1 French immersion. In that same announcement, the Premier promised that government would seek to improve access in rural schools. My question to the Premier is, how far is his Liberal government willing to go to provide more access to French immersion in rural New Brunswick?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it was a historic day when we announced that we're going to go back to Grade 1 in French immersion in the education system, Mr. Speaker, and it's our government that is investing the most in education moving forward. We're going to put the right tools in the right places. So, Mr. Speaker, right now we feel that we're on par right now with the enrollment in the province of New Brunswick, with over 1,800 students that have enrolled into French immersion. And, Mr. Speaker, we're going to be making sure that we can deliver these services over the years to come, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we have accessibility in the rural areas. Mr. Speaker, throughout New Brunswick we have some rural areas that may not have the uptake that we would like to see, but we will work together with those communities and with those schools and principals and districts to be able to allow those programs to come in. So, Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of the record that we have in education. Unlike the government opposite where they cut in education, we are making record investments in the right place. And, Mr. Speaker, we do believe that what we're doing in education will really bear fruit in the years to come, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Fredericton Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, we can all agree that the demographics here in New Brunswick have significantly changed over the past 20 years, and what may have worked back then may not be the answer today. My question to the Premier is, will he have his government officials review the minimum enrollment quotas for grades 1, 3, and 6, entry points for French immersion, and lower them based on today's demographics?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as the enrollment numbers come in, we're dealing on a daily basis with the Department of Education, working with our districts to see how the enrollment numbers are coming in throughout the province, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're working very diligently with our educators, with the districts, with the Department of Education to make sure that we have the proper resources in place in the upcoming September year, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, you have to realize that this initiative here is going to be an initiative that we all understand that earlier is better. Even the former critic of education said the same thing, Mr. Speaker. So what we have to do, Mr. Speaker, is continue to work with our districts, work with our parents, work with the educators in the system to make sure that we have a good program in place. And that's what we're going to do with the proper resources in place, Mr. Speaker. So I'm very happy with our record in education. We're very happy with our government, where we're putting the proper resources in the proper place and making sure that we have the best education system moving forward, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Fredericton Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, in my riding, there has been a group formed with the goal of bringing back French immersion to the students of the Grand Lake area. This group has advocated for the return of this program primarily through social media and believes the support is there for the program. Now, Mr. Speaker, with the growing efforts of these parents, will the Premier commit to reinstating the French immersion program at the Minto Elementary Middle School and give the students of the Grand Lake area the same opportunities as students in our urban centers? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Premier.
I just have to point out a few things, Mr. Speaker. As we know, earlier is better. That's why the former critic of education said it when he was questioning the government a few months ago. That's probably also why he's the former education critic, is because he said that, Mr. Speaker. Second, we're very proud of the fact that we're basing this on a report that was done in a nonpartisan way with a former Minister of Education of a Conservative government, a former Minister of Education of a Liberal government, going around the province, listening to experts, parents, children themselves, and coming with the recommendation of restoring French immersion to grade 1. I have to say this. I have to get up, Mr. Speaker. I debated on whether I should or not, but I have to get up and just point to the irony to have a member of the opposition get up advocating that French immersion be in grade 1 in her community, Mr. Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition thinks that it's the lightning rod that has ruined the province, even though that has not been in place for some years, Mr. Speaker. The irony is beyond me, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition needs to figure out if he's coming or going, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Maryland Sunbury.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier's pretty quick to twist somebody's words around, that's for sure, Mr. Speaker. So it's a common theme that we've been hearing from the Premier as of late. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure regarding the Miramichi bypass that belongs to Route 11. And there seems to be some concern with some of the citizens of the Miramichi area, in particular the Chatham area and the businesses over there, of why the Minister wants to say one thing before in the campaign and then say the exact opposite now that he is the Minister and is in government now. In the spring of 2014, when the plans were revealed to build the Miramichi bypass, the Minister said very clearly that this was going to be a negative effect on economic development in the riding, and I was just wondering if the Minister still feels that way today.
The Honourable Minister of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I did have concerns when they unveiled the plan back in the year that the member opposite had just mentioned. I had real concerns because they didn't do consultation with the business community. They didn't do consultation with the community of Miramichi, Mr. Speaker. So I raised those concerns publicly. And to their credit, I would say the former government came back with a revised plan after that consultation was done. They didn't cover all the facts and all the things that the communities were concerned with, but they did change the off-ramps at the Miramichi end where the business community had concerns. So I applaud them for that. What they weren't able to do, Mr. Speaker, was get the federal dollars that were required to get the job done, Mr. Speaker. So, we're at a point right now where we're not just talking about Route 11 and the bypass at Miramichi, we're actually getting it done, Mr. Speaker. And I'm proud to be part of a government that is actually looking out for the best interests and the safety of New Brunswickers and the people in my community.
Member for New Maryland Sunbury.
Well, I think, Mr. Speaker, the logo and the slogan for this government shouldn't be listening and getting things done. It should be saying one thing and doing another, I think is what their logo should be. because the minister was very clearly against the bypass of the Miramichi, Mr. Speaker, very clearly against this. He talked extensively. He said he says it's counterproductive to spend so much money building a road that stands to take money out of the pockets of Miramichiers, small and medium-sized business owners. One of the other things he said, Mr. Speaker, is that one of the major reasons for the upgrading of Highway 11, aside from safety, because safety is one of the major ones, was to create economic development and to help the North. So it's kind of ironic. The plan that they're going to bring forward is going to drastically affect upwards of 20 businesses that operate along that stretch. And Mr. Speaker, is he going to stand up for those 20 businesses that are screaming for help, or will he stand up for the businesses, or is he going to let them close?
The Honourable Minister of Department of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I find it a little ironic coming from the member opposite, speaking about things that are going on in the Miramichi riding. And Mr. Speaker, very proud of the work we're doing in the community of Miramichi and all across this province to create economic development. The Highway 11 project is going to create over 2,500 jobs over the 4-year period. It's a $272 million investment. It's money that we're able to invest as a government based on our priorities of investing in health care and education and growing the economy and creating jobs, Mr. Speaker. And I'll tell you, it's something that wouldn't have been possible under their leadership, Mr. Speaker. In fact, they talked about it, they didn't get it done. On our side, we're actually getting the work done. Shovels are going to be in the ground next year, Mr. Speaker. The planning is already underway. In terms of businesses that had some concerns, I've met with them individually, and I'll continue to meet with them to work with them. And, Mr. Speaker, we're doing this for the right reason. We're going to save lives. There's been 275 collisions just on the stretch in Miramichi with 8 fatalities, Mr. Speaker. So we're going to get this done.
Member for New Maryland, Sunbury.
The minister of say one thing and do another, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to do another little flashback, a flashback to the spring of 2014, when the Right to Life protests were going on the legislature floor, and the minister talked about there's nothing more precious than the life of a child. So it just goes along with the theme, Mr. Speaker, that the minister is willing to say one thing before an election, but say extremely the opposite afterwards. So we have to wonder, what are the priorities for Miramichiers, Mr. Speaker, and those that live in the Chatham area? Is the Anderson Bridge up there on the top of the list for them, or is the bypass of the Miramichi bypass a priority for them? The businesses have acknowledged that the minister's extended the olive branch to have a chat about it, but they're not very optimistic that they're going to get any results. So is the minister going to speak in favor of the businesses like he did before the election, or is he going to leave them hanging now after the election, now that he's sitting in cabinet?
The Honourable Minister of Department of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell the member opposite what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue to work with our leader and our team on this side of the House to continue, Mr. Speaker, to continue to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in the Miramichi region. That's what I'm going to do, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to continue to get the job done, whether it be opening a new school in Miramichi East, which will be open this fall, to the children who, when that party was in power, canceled that project, Mr. Speaker. Canceled that project. We're getting it done. It'll be open this September. A new school in Miramichi West, Max Aitken Academy, is already open. Children are already in it. Highway 11, $272 million project for our province. A 240-bed state-of-the-art nursing home, which will be under construction very soon under the leadership of the Minister of Seniors and Long-Term Care, who is also from Miramichi, who does a great job representing the people of Miramichi. So I've got no lessons to learn from the member opposite who just wants to play politics. I'll continue to work with this team to get things done.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Globe and Mail revealed that New Brunswick has the highest rate of sexual assault complaints that police consider unfounded at 32%. The national average was 19%, while in St. John, 51% of sexual assault complaints were dismissed as baseless. This is extremely alarming, as sexual violence is already underreported in our province. Mr. Speaker, the New Brunswick Women's Council is calling on the government to take immediate action. My question is, what is the Minister of Public Safety and Justice doing to resolve the injustice to women who come forward to report sexual assault to the police, given the low conviction rate?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the member opposite doesn't mind me getting up on this as the minister responsible for women's equality, but also as Premier, as this is very troubling and something that is alarming and that we're very much aware of, Mr. Speaker. I just want to let you know and update the members of the legislature of what has been done since this report came out. Mr. Speaker, we've actually had a meeting and conversation with the ministers responsible for women's equality in the Atlantic Canada region, with Newfoundland and Labrador sending in the Deputy Speaker who you introduced just last week. We discussed this very issue and how we can coordinate a response that is appropriate to make sure we look into this very troublesome situation. And we've also had a conversation, Mr. Speaker, with the minister responsible federally, and the same message was given to her that we wanted to work with the federal government as well on any response that they would see forthcoming based on this report. So I thank very much the leader of the third party, Mr. Speaker, for bringing this to the attention of the legislature.
Leader of the third party.
Mr. Speaker, all New Brunswick police forces have committed to reviewing the sexual assault complaints they've dismissed, but the New Brunswick Women's Council wants the case review process to involve experts from sexual assault crisis centres. So the question is, will the minister ensure our police forces include those with the frontline expertise and direct service experience with sexual violence in these case reviews?
The Honourable the Premier.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I'll get up just to just quickly mention to the member that we, as a government, are taking this very seriously and want to work with our Atlantic region counterparts as well as with the federal government in any response that we would all deem appropriate. Officials are have already been asked to discuss exactly what this could look like, how we could coordinate our efforts to analyze this situation and ultimately rectify it. And to the point about the Women's Council, Mr. Speaker, just to let the member opposite and all the legislature know that I did meet with the Women's Council this weekend on Saturday. We discussed this very topic. I let them know that we are, again, working with our counterparts in the region and federally to make sure that we have a response, an analysis, and of course that we rectify this situation as soon as possible. Exactly how we go about that, Mr. Speaker, does remain to be seen, but at this point I can tell you that we are taking this very seriously and working with our colleagues to make sure that we move this file forward as quickly as possible.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's great to see the Premier taking this as seriously as he is in his responsibility for women and as Premier. I do want to ask, though, Mr. Speaker, given the need for better and more consistent oversight of how our police forces deal with sexual assault, will this government investigate why 10 out of 12 New Brunswick police forces classified complaints with sexual assault as unfounded at rates higher than the national average and report those findings back to the House?
The Honourable the Premier.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Pour nous, c'est très sérieux et c'est très important d'analyser la situation pour amener une réponse assez rapidement. Pour ce faire, on est dans des pourparlers déjà avec les autres gouvernements et plus spécifiquement les ministres responsables pour l'égalité des femmes dans la région des provinces de l'Atlantique et avec notre collègue au niveau fédéral. Nous voulons assurer qu'on va avoir une coordination de nos réponses et nos analyses respectives. En effet, peut-être ça sera fait conjointement ou peut-être ça se fera d'une façon donc on amène nos propres analyses de la situation et on coordonne bien sûr nos actions. Alors, Monsieur le Président, en ce moment, je peux vous dire que notre gouvernement traite ceci de façon très sérieuse et on va avoir une réponse. Exactement comment on va travailler avec le gouvernement fédéral et les autres provinces reste à voir. Alors, on va donner une mise à jour très bientôt à l'Assemblée législative concernant ce sujet très important. Merci.
Member for Southwest Miramichi, Bay d'Avin.
Mr. Speaker, last December, the PISA scores were released throughout Canada, and in one section below the New Brunswick scores, there was something interesting going on that I don't think a lot of New Brunswickers knew about. The Francophone sector of education in our province is the fastest improving education sector in Canada, and some research suggests the 8th fastest in the world. These improvements have been over the last 4 years. I see this as an achievement, and I would like to ask the Minister of Education again today, what did the Francophone sector do, or what did they buy into, that has helped them improve at such a rapid pace? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le secteur francophone, oui, bravo, il fait des bons travail pour les étudiants ici dans le Nouveau-Brunswick. Et les résultats sont très, très bons. Mais c'est nécessaire pour expliquer à le membre opposite aujourd'hui. The PISA provides a tool that's used for current practice to be able to have informed decisions going forward in continuous education, Mr. Speaker, and improvement. In reading and science, New Brunswick ranks specifically above the average for participating countries, and in math, the average is equal to that of the participating countries. But unlike most provinces, Mr. Speaker, there's no significant difference in science and reading between Francophone students and Anglophone students. But the Francophone sector did, Mr. Speaker, have better results in math, and we want to congratulate them for them. Math is one of the areas now that we are focusing of the Anglophone education plan for year one, and the Francophone sector does an excellent job at taking a community approach in education, and we are now doing that with our Anglophone sector, Mr. Speaker. So we are putting the proper resources in place to be improved.
Member for Southwest Miramichi Bay-Devin.
Mr. Speaker, my point in that question is that across the board, they are improving. And it started 4 years ago, and they're still not where they would like to be, but my question is, it's obvious to me that the two sectors, I'm guessing they're doing different things. So my question here today, again, what did the Francophone sector do 4 years ago? They started this. What did they do that has had them improve across all areas? And I think it's very important that the Minister of Education shares that information because if the two sectors are doing something extremely different from each other, they might work together to learn from each other, and we might bring all scores up across the board in New Brunswick. So today I'd like to ask again, what is the Francophone sector doing specifically that has them improving in all of those areas? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, we did extensive consultation over the last couple of years working with the education sector, working with our communities, and the Francophone sector are doing some great things, working on a community-based approach, and now with our two education programs moving forward with a 10-year education plan, we're going to be doing those best practices also in the Anglophone sector. So we're learning from one each other. That's the difference between this government and the other government. When they were in opposition, they were putting up silos. They weren't communicating. What I see today is our education systems working together and sharing best practices. Mr. Speaker, when a community takes ownership on education, good things will happen, and that's what's happening right now, Mr. Speaker. Good things are happening in education. We have record investments in education. We're working together with our districts. We're working together with our teachers, working together with our communities. We're working together with our families. We're working together with everybody in the province. It takes the province to put this together, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very glad on this side of the House that we will have one of the best education systems moving forward, Mr. Speaker. I hope that the opposition will join and try and not do that.
Member for Southwest Miramichi Bay-Devin.
Mr. Speaker, it's an answer that I seek. The Francophone schools in New Brunswick between 2012 and 2015 attained the highest improvement rate in the country. In science, the country improved by 3 points, while New Brunswick's Francophone schools improved by 27. In reading, the country improved by 4, while New Brunswick's Francophone sector improved by 22. In math, the country decreased by its score by 2 points, while New Brunswick's Francophone schools improved by 5. So as you can see, it's not so much that I'm comparing both sectors to each other, it's just that the Francophone sector is improving rapidly. And I think it's very important that the Minister talks about sharing best practices and community involvement, but what is it that they're sharing? What knowledge can we gain in the Anglophone sector from the Francophone sector, which seems to be hitting it out of the park?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Speaker, I think we're going to hit it out of the park, and we're going to have a home run, Mr. Speaker, with working together. On the Francophone sector, we see a community approach, and that's a community getting everybody involved. The Francophone sector also does what we call performance management to identify the challenges and track their progress. So we're going to use those tools and those opportunities in the Anglophone sector, clearly identified in the education plan moving forward, Mr. Speaker. And it's important that we continue to use these best practices from each sector to improve the system as a whole. So unlike the opposition where they're trying to find a wedge issue again here today, Mr. Speaker, we feel that we want to be able to extend the olive branch to the opposition to work with us, work with our communities, to be able to make sure that we can identify all the positive things that we have in all sectors of our education system. And Mr. Speaker, with the record investments that we're doing in the right places, with the proper people getting involved, with the community as a whole working together, Mr. Speaker, we will hit it out of the park.
Member for Riverview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, the Gallant government made a pair of announcements, one regarding the Sisson mine and the other regarding First Nations gasoline tobacco taxation. It's been reported that the two agreements were connected, but I'd like to focus on the taxation agreement first, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister explain what consultation was done and what consideration was done, if any, for the concerns of the independent gasoline retailers, such as decoupling from HST and providing a cap? Because again, Mr. Speaker, in the province here, they need to know that their consultations were heard and some consideration was given in how they deal with making a difference for them regarding remaining in business and continuing to employ New Brunswickers here in the province of New Brunswick. Now, I know the minister is going to talk about the 70-30 split going down from 95-5, but the fact of the matter is the actual revenue from the budget is increasing by $7 million. So what consideration did the minister give to the independent retailers here in the gasoline retailers?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say first that I'm a little disappointed that a week after the budget, I still don't have a question on the budget. However, I want to reiterate that indeed we listen to New Brunswickers. Indeed, we are honoring our commitments, and we're investing strategically for the good of New Brunswick, all the while protecting what New Brunswickers told us is very important, health and education. Mr. Speaker, we're so proud of our budget, but Mr. Speaker, we're also very proud of the new taxation agreements that we were able to collaboratively develop with our First Nations neighbours. And Mr. Speaker, these were collaborative arrangements, and we, as we usually or always do, we take into consideration all of the stakeholders that are involved.
Time for question period has expired. I have a